The West just did the unthinkable against Russia. Vladimir Putin bet everything on Western hesitation. He counted on fear of escalation keeping long-range weapons leashed to the battlefield. He was wrong. In a dramatic policy reversal, the United States, Britain, France, and their NATO partners have lifted all restrictions on Ukraine using advanced Western missiles for strikes deep inside Russian territory. The results have been immediate and devastating. Since the decision took effect earlier this year, Ukrainian forces have executed over 60 confirmed long-range strikes using systems like ATAK-EMS and Storm Shadow. Critical logistics hubs have been obliterated. Air defense batteries silenced. Russian aircraft forced to operate from bases hundreds of kilometers further back. This is not incremental pressure. This is a fundamental shift in the balance of the war. Ukraine is thrilled, and Moscow is scrambling. Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications because we cut through the headlines to deliver the precise strategic analysis this conflict demands. We examine not just what happened, but why it matters and what comes next. In this video, I am going to show you exactly how the West crossed a threshold many believed was off limits, and why this decision has Ukraine's military leadership optimistic in ways we haven't seen in months. We will break down the specific weapon systems now striking deep into Russia, map the key targets that have been hit with devastating effect, analyze the tactical advantages Ukraine has gained on the battlefield, expose the second and third order effects on Russian supply lines and air operations, and connect all of this to the larger geopolitical picture. By the time we are done, you will understand why this move represents more than just new weapons. It represents a new phase of the war where Russia's rear areas are no longer sanctuaries. To understand why this matters, we have to go back to the fundamental dynamics that have defined this conflict since 2022. Russia launched its full-scale invasion expecting a quick victory. When that failed, they shifted to a strategy of attrition. Throw men and material at the problem in overwhelming quantities. Rely on secure rear areas to mass forces, repair equipment, store ammunition, and launch glide bombs and missiles with relative impunity. This strategy has been brutal and costly, but it has ground forward slowly in places like Donetsk. Ukraine, on the other hand, has fought a defensive war of incredible resilience, but has consistently lacked the ability to strike the Russian rear at scale. The front lines became a meat grinder, while Russian logistics nodes 100, 200, even 300 kilometers behind the lines operated with minimal interference. The key actors in this story each bring distinct capabilities and constraints. Vladimir Putin's Russia retains significant mass. It has adapted its economy to wartime production. It has deepened partnerships with North Korea and Iran for drones and artillery shells. But its military is stretched. Trained manpower is scarce. Modern equipment losses have been high, and its ability to project power depends on keeping logistics lines open and air assets protected. Ukraine under President Zelensky has demonstrated extraordinary innovation, particularly in drone warfare and tactical adaptation, but it remains dependent on Western support for advanced munitions and heavy systems. Its population and industrial base are under constant pressure. The Western allies, particularly the United States, United Kingdom, and France, have provided billions in aid, but have long operated under self-imposed restrictions. The fear of escalation, particularly nuclear rhetoric from Moscow, kept long-range strike weapons on a short leash. Until now. Baseline facts are important here. The Russian border is not far from key Ukrainian positions in some sectors, but many critical Russian assets sit 200 to 500 kilometers inside Russia proper. Airfields like Engels in Saratov Oblast or strategic logistics in Bryansk and Kursk regions were previously beyond the reliable reach of most Ukrainian systems without risking high-value Western assets. The Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles provided by Britain and France have ranges exceeding 250 kilometers with stealthy profiles and advanced warheads. American ATAK-EMS ballistic missiles offer roughly 300-kilometer reach with precision guidance. Previous policy forbade their use against targets inside Russia to avoid crossing what Moscow called red lines. That policy has changed. The unthinkable has become operational reality. Now let's examine exactly what the West authorized and how Ukraine is using it. The policy shift did not happen overnight. It evolved through careful calibration. Early limited permissions for border areas gave way to broader authorization as Russia failed to escalate in response to previous strikes. Intelligence assessments showed that Putin was bluffing on many of his threats. The result is a green light for Ukrainian forces to plan and execute strikes using these high-precision Western systems against military targets deep in Russian territory. This is not blanket permission for any target. It focuses on legitimate military objectives like command posts, ammunition storage, air defense sites, and logistics hubs. But the effect is profound. Consider the weapons themselves. The MGM-140 ATACMS is no ordinary rocket. Launched from HIMARS or M270 systems already familiar to Ukrainian crews, it delivers a 500-pound class warhead with GPS-aided inertial guidance. It can strike with devastating accuracy from nearly 300 kilometers away. The Storm Shadow and its French counterpart Scalp are air-launched cruise missiles. They fly at low altitude to evade radar. Their broach warhead uses a precursor charge to penetrate hardened structures before the main explosive detonates inside. These are not area effect weapons. They are precision instruments designed for high-value targets. Ukraine has integrated them effectively with their own targeting intelligence, often supplemented by Western satellite and drone reconnaissance. The strikes themselves tell the story. In the weeks following the policy change, Ukrainian forces have hit targets with clinical precision. Ammunition depots in the Bryansk region have been turned into infernos. One strike alone reportedly destroyed thousands of tons of artillery shells and rockets that would have otherwise fed the front lines for weeks. Air defense systems, including S-400 components, have been targeted and degraded, forcing Russian crews to reposition constantly. Forward airfields used for launching glide bomb attacks have come under pressure, compelling Russian tactical aviation to operate from more distant bases. This increases flight times, reduces sortie rates, and complicates the air war over the front. Tactically, this changes the battlefield dynamic in several ways. Russian forces can no longer assume their rear is safe. Logistics convoys and storage sites must now be dispersed or heavily defended, drawing resources away from the front. The tempo of Russian operations has been disrupted. Where previously they could mass for local offensives with supporting fires from relative safety, now they face constant threat of precision interdiction. Ukraine gains breathing room to conduct its own operations, whether defensive consolidation or localized counterattacks. The psychological effect should not be underestimated either. Ukrainian troops see that the war is no longer entirely one-sided in terms of reach. Strategically, the implications go deeper. Russia's war economy relies on moving large volumes of material from production centers to the front. Hitting those nodes creates bottlenecks. Oil refineries and fuel storage facilities processing products destined for military use have also been affected, in some cases forcing Russia to reroute or ration. This is not about collapsing the Russian economy overnight. It is about raising the cost and complexity of sustaining the invasion. Second-order effects include pressure on Russian air defenses across the theater. Every S-400 battery or radar destroyed in the rear is one less available to protect forces in occupied Ukraine or even strategic assets further afield. Russia is forced to choose where to concentrate protection. Geopolitically, this demonstrates something important to allies and adversaries alike. NATO resolve is not as fragile as some in Moscow hoped. The controlled escalation has not triggered the catastrophic responses Putin threatened. China and other observers take note of Western willingness to support Ukraine with meaningful capabilities when the strategic calculation shifts. For Ukraine, it validates years of diplomacy and battlefield performance. It shows that persistence and demonstrated need can move even cautious partners. The entire balance of power in the theater is shifting toward greater parity in strike capability. But no development in this war is without complications and limitations. While these strikes are tactically successful, missile inventories remain finite. Western production lines are ramping up, but ATACMS and Storm Shadow are expensive and complex systems. Ukraine cannot fire them at the rate of cheaper domestic drones. Russia is adapting. It is dispersing assets, further dispersing storage, moving aircraft to more distant airfields, and improving electronic warfare and deception measures. The nuclear saber-rattling continues, though the lack of proportional response so far suggests limits to how far Moscow is willing to go. Some analysts in the West still warn that deeper strikes risk uncontrolled escalation, though the evidence to date shows Russia prioritizing conventional responses or asymmetric actions elsewhere. Manpower and territorial control on the ground remain challenging for Ukraine. These strikes degrade Russian sustainment, but they do not directly solve the infantry shortages or change every sector of the 1,000-kilometer front. Questions remain about long-term sustainability and whether Russia can absorb these losses by further mobilizing or shifting production. Looking ahead, this development points toward a more dynamic phase of the conflict. Ukraine now possesses tools to keep Russian forces off balance while it continues to innovate with its own long-range drone programs. Russia must decide whether to invest heavily in rear area defense at the expense of frontline strength or accept continued attrition of its logistics. The West has signaled that support can evolve based on battlefield realities rather than fixed ideological lines. For viewers seeking to understand this war beyond daily headlines, these shifts are critical. They explain why certain sectors see sudden changes in momentum and why diplomatic calculations in capitals from Washington to Beijing are being revised. The geopolitical landscape continues to evolve rapidly. New capabilities, new policies, and new realities on the ground will shape what comes next. This is why States News exists, to provide the context, the technical detail, and the strategic insight necessary to make sense of it all. If you value analysis that goes beyond the sound bites, stay with us. Subscribe. The next chapter in this story is already being written, and we will be here to break it down for you.